going on? It's Cash here, and one of the most fun things to speculate about for a new Borderlands game are the potential new playable characters. Borderlands 4 could go in a lot of different ways right now. They could follow in pre-sequel's footsteps and reuse characters already established in the story as they try and not overbloat the already massive cast of Vault Hunters. They could also have previous Vault Hunters be playable again with a new skill tree and coat of paint. But the most likely thing to happen would be for Gearbox to come up with 4 completely new classes, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. I'll be showing off some of the ideas I've personally come up with based on different things from all the games, varying from enemies to my personal ideas. So let's just get into it. Okay, so the first one I wanted to talk about is a Goliath Vault Hunter. Goliaths are enemies in Borderlands 2 and 3 that go into a rage state when their helmet is shot off. For every kill they get in this state, they level up 1 badass rank, going from raging, badass, super badass, ultimate badass, hulking massive destruction, and finally godlike. Of course, the action skill would be them manually taking their helmet off and then going into a melee only rage mode like Krieg in Borderlands 2. My idea is that there will be a meter that is constantly ticking down, but for every kill you get, the meter will fill up a bit. If that meter fills all the way up, you progress to the next badass level, getting more damage, speed, and health regen. But the meter will also take more kills to fill up with each level. In the skill tree, there would be skills to unlock further badass levels, with the middle capstone being hulking and the end capstone being the godlike. That skill tree will also contain many skills that make leveling your action skill easier, along with having an emphasis on melee damage and being the main kill skill tree. Moving on to the other 2 trees, I wanted to base these off of different Goliath types we see throughout the games, with the first being the corrosive Goliath. This tree would feature a lot of corrosive damage over time skills, as well as buffs to overall elemental output. I also think it would be cool for the capstone to be a melee override that lets the Goliath spit out a corrosive pool on the ground that enemies will step into and take constant damage. I think a skill like this could go really well with a stack skill that gives you more stacks the more corrosive damage you deal. Sort of like Athena's Maelstrom stacks from pre-sequel, with different skills in the tree that are giving you separate buffs pertaining to the amount of stacks you have. The final tree would be the Juggernaut Goliath, a type of Goliath in Borderlands 2 that only spawns in true Vault Hunter mode and above. It's also the only Goliath type to not have a helmet and rage, but we'll be ignoring that part. This tree will be all about damage reduction and being an overall tank, having a lot of bonus health skills and possibly having an emphasis on heavy weapons like launchers. I'm not too sure what the capstone would be. I'm thinking maybe something to do with like getting a free double shot on launchers, kind of leaning more into a gladiator Goliath that you would find in the Torg DLC. So I feel an emphasis on explosives and launchers could be really good for that tree. The next class I want to make is the Shock Trooper. So many Vault Hunters have had some sort of shock adjacent build, from Roland and Axton in their respective games, both having a Shock Trooper class mod that was built around shock damage, but never worked well because neither character had any skills that help with elemental damage in any way. Then you had Gage in BL2, who has an entire skill tree dedicated to shock damage, and the build barely works. The main shock skill, Wires Don't Talk, barely gives any elemental damage even with class mod buffs. And the capstone Make It Sparkle is useless. So because of that, I want a character that is fully built around shock damage so that this can stop being just that random class mod that you never pick up. I can see this class going in a lot of different ways for the action skill, with a multiple charge Shock Nova being my immediate choice. But I think what would be way better is to make them a similar character to Zane and have them use many different shock gadgets with each skill tree pertaining to each of them. What I have in mind would be a Tesla that also acts as a shield, with skills in that tree giving it health regen and ammo regen similar to Roland's turret in Borderlands 1. Next would be a trap that's thrown onto the ground. If an enemy walks onto it, the pad will turn into a cage with shock beams as bars. The enemy will be stuck in place and the cage constantly drains their health with shock damage for a certain amount of time. If the cage kills an enemy before the timer is up, you'll get some bonus cooldown back. The final gadget would be a large shock rail cannon that takes a while to shoot but does massive damage, especially on crit. Think pre-nerf ion cannon from Borderlands 3, but it's only one shot. I can see this synergizing great with the cage skill if the character is allowed to use 2 action skills at once like Zane can. For the trees, I would like the Tesla shield to be based more on support skills, like how I mentioned the shield will give passive ammo regen and healing. I personally really don't like skill trees that only work in co-op. Looking at you, Aurelia Red Tree. So I'd also want to make it a hybrid with skills that focus on spending less ammo, giving way to a sort of hoarder build that lets you have a chance to not spend ammo when shooting an enemy that is inflicted with a shock damage over time. But the capstone of this tree will give the shield a singularity and nova similar to the black hole shield from Borderlands 2, pre-sequel, and 3. Operating similar to Axton's nuke skill in Borderlands 2, except shock, and except all the enemies will be stuck in the damage pool afterwards. For the cage tree, I would would want to make this one the main shock damage tree, with, of course, elemental stacks and crit bonuses. The main goal of this tree is to paralyze enemies and then finish them off with crit damage. And because of that, I also want to add in a late tree melee override skill that shoots a bolt of lightning out of a glove, dealing low damage but completely paralyzing an enemy for a few seconds and having a small amount of damage over time. This skill would also, of course, have a very long cooldown in between shots. And for the railguns tree, it would focus on the more soldier type abilities like impact and metal storm, as well as having the now Borderlands staple sprint and shoot at the same time skill. The tree would be mainly focused on reload speed and fire rate, with most of the in-between skills making the railgun not take so long to shoot and boosting its damage. The capstone would be to sacrifice a large portion of the railgun's damage, so instead of only having one single shot, you would get to shoot as many times as you want within a short time frame, giving you a whole lot more incentive to keep your fire rate skills up. There should also be augments that allow your railgun to do different elements besides just shock, because this tree will be your main regular damage tree to combat enemies that are immune to shock. And for the last Vault Hunter I have today, it's the Nomad. Out of all the enemy types I've wanted to play as the most, I think Nomad takes the cake. The action skill for the Nomad would be to have them take out their huge shield. This would give heavy damage reduction from enemies to the front of you, working similar to Athena's shield, without throwing it at the end, obviously. And it would also replace your melee with quickly moving the shield out. More simple but effective action skill for this one at first, but as you level up, more and more will be added to it. The first tree would be your companion character tree, with the companions being the midgets that the Nomads tie to their shield. The further you go down the tree, the more midgets you'll be able to strap to your shield, starting with one as a mandatory skill like Anarchy before you can progress down the tree any further, and then another at the halfway point, and the final one being one skill before the final capstone. How they will work is after you go into your action skill, press the action skill button again, and the Nomad will slam their shield on the ground and release them. They'll be really fast and swarm enemies, but can only attack up close. The tree will be all about them, but from their damage, health, and the capstone would let one of the midgets at a time sacrifice their life to revive you instantly. They will have to run over to you first though. Also in this skill tree would feature a lot of optional aggro skills to put on yourself as to not let them die immediately. The next tree will be all about melee damage, seeing your shield get a crap ton of spikes put on it as seen from badass Nomads in BL2. The tree's capstone will give you a move that lets you quickly charge forward with your shield until you hit an enemy, dealing massive damage. The tree will be pretty focused on keeping your action skill up as much as possible, so that means a lot of cooldown skills as well as a skill that for every melee kill you get, the longer your duration will last. I was also thinking that this would be a good spot to include a new melee stack skill mechanic. It would stack every time you hit someone with melee damage and quickly deplete afterwards. The more stacks you have, the more melee attack speed and movement speed you will have. The final tree here was pretty hard to pick between the heavy Nomads, blaster Nomads, and pyros, but I ended up going with the latter. As you might expect, this tree will be all about fire damage, giving you a flamethrower while your action skill is active with insanely high damage over time as the capstone or middle capstone. Haven't really decided yet, I'm not sure what would be the most balanced. The other capstone would be a skill that when an enemy dies from fire damage, they ignite all the enemies around them. The industry would also contain a few kill skills like more dot or higher ignite chance on kill. And those were my potential Vault Hunter ideas. Truth be told, I have a lot more ideas than this, but I kept it at 3 so the video didn't go on all day. So tell me if you want to see a part 2 of this, because I'd love to share more of my ideas with you, to be honest. But yeah, nah mate, let me know in the comments what you think of these Vault Hunters. And mate, if you've got your own ideas, surely tell me, because I'd love to see what other people can come up with. But with that though, I'd appreciate you more than my mayor if you chucked me a sub, join the Discord, follow me on Twitter, and mate, I'll catch you next time. But of course, before the video ends, I gotta shout out my channelmen. They are JBH, who can do that one skateboard trick you never had the guts to try when you were a kid. Wesker520, who's actually met Santa. Apparently, he's just chilling at the mall every year. Who knew, dude? Angel B, who was the first ever person to become a kangaroo jockey. It was ahead of its time, really. You even had a pouch to spoil your stuff in while you rode. It was awesome. And Chimpy Scrimpy, who has the power to lag switch in real life. They've never lost a fight, and they can kind of just jam themselves through walls, which is pretty sick. But thank you guys so much for the extra support. I really do appreciate it. If you also want to become cool like these guys, well, you know, you can become a channel member too. The join button's right there. But yeah, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.